Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate a story I saw on alien cases. It's about an Australian farmer who had all his water stolen by a UFO. In the early morning of September the 30th, 1980, near the quiet town of Rosedale, Victoria, Australia, the silence was shattered, not by thunder, nor by a predator. It was broken by a sound that didn't belong to the farm. It's an event that left a 40-foot tall water tank mysteriously emptied of 10,000 gallons of water, and a caretaker whose body and life were irrecoverably altered. What happened at White Ike's farm wasn't a mere sighting. It was an operation, a resource extraction by an unknown intelligence that didn't ask for permission and left no explanations. George Blackwell is the man at the center of it all. His word was defined by the health of his herd and the security of the White Ox farm. Blackwell's job as a caretaker was his identity. In a region where cattle rustling was a real and growing threat, with modern thieves using helicopters to steal animals worth thousands of dollars, Blackwell's vigilance was the first and last line of defense. His house on the property was strategically positioned so that any disturbance among the animals would reach him immediately. George Blackwell was in essence the guardian of that land. So the night of September the 29th began like any other. Blackwell went to bed at 10:30 p.m. The farm was at peace. But at around 1 a.m., he was jolted from his sleep, not by an alarm, but by a cacophony of animal panic. The cattle weren't just restless. They were in absolute terror, bellowing in high-pitched panic. His horse, normally calm, was winnowing and galloping in frantic circles inside its enclosure. It was a sound of pure dread, a sound that indicated an imminent and deadly threat. Overlapping the chaos, Blackwell noticed another noise, a high-pitched, persistent whistle. Faint at first, but piercing. It wasn't the sound of a truck engine or the blades of a helicopter. It was something different, something electronic and strangely melodic. Instinctively, duty called. He got up, adrenaline starting to pump, convinced he was dealing with cattle rustlers. When he opened the door, the scene was even more chaotic than the sounds suggested. The horse was covered in sweat, its eyes wide with terror. The herd moved as a single, panicked entity, trying to break through the fence. And then he saw the source. Moving from right to left, about 150 yards away, was a blinding light. It hovered just about 8 or 10 feet above the ground, gliding silently over the property. Blackwell's mind searched for explanations. An aircraft in trouble, perhaps? Looking for a place for an emergency landing? But as the object passed in front of a large grain silo, its silhouette became clear against the structure, and all conventional explanations evaporated. It had no wings, no tail, no rotors. It was shaped like a classic saucer with a smooth white dome on the top. It was about 26 feet in diameter and perhaps 13 feet high, studded with orange and blue lights that pulsed gently. The high-pitched whistle now emanated directly from it. The object continued its path, passing a haystack and moving deliberately towards the farm's most prominent landmark, the massive concrete water tank. And it was at that moment that George Blackwell's concern turned to alarm. The water tank was a colossal structure, 40 feet high, holding nearly 10,000 gallons of water, a vital resource for the farm during droughts. Seeing the object approach the structure dangerously, Blackwell acted. He ran inside, grabbed his motorcycle, and sped through the darkness toward the tank about a half-mile from his house. As he got closer, the whistle became deafening. He passed a cattle pen and saw one of his cows, so terrified it was foaming at the mouth. In an act of compassion, amidst the chaos, he stopped to open the gate, and the animal bolted into a shed, seeking refuge from the anomaly in the sky. Blackwell continued, stopping his bike about 50 yards from the tank. The object was now stationary, hovering silently beside the huge concrete structure. He tried to get closer on foot, but an invisible force stopped him. An intense vibration took over everything. The air, the ground, his own body. Everything seemed to vibrate at a strange and uncomfortable frequency. It was then that he witnessed the central act of this incredible drama. The object rose smoothly to the top of the tank. From its underside, a kind of black, flexible tube descended, entering with precision through the access opening at the top of the reservoir. Simultaneously, the whistling sound reached an unbearable peak, forcing Blackwell to cover his ears, though it did little to help against the sound's intensity. For several seconds, which must have felt like an eternity, he watched, paralyzed. The scene was surreal. An alien machine, seemingly refueling with Earth's most precious resource. What was happening? Was it water they wanted? For what purpose? Cooling? Propulsion? Life support? Or all the above? Suddenly, the operation was over. The tube retracted, and then, with a deafening roar, the event shifted from a silent observation to a violent assault. An incredibly strong and hot blast of wind emanated from the object, hitting Blackwell with the force of an explosion. He described the sensation as if every molecule in his body had lost cohesion, as if he had turned into jelly. The force lifted him off the ground, throwing him violently backward. The wind kicked up debris, stones, branches, and leaves, which pelted him as he lay on the ground. The object rose gradually, then shot off to the east, its power still stirring the landscape as it passed until it disappeared over the horizon. Stunned, George Blackwell managed to sit up. He watched the craft depart, a point of light receding into the vastness. When he finally stood up, the first piece of evidence was at his feet. Where there had once been green grass, there was now a dark, almost black circle, nearly 100 feet in diameter. He was at the center of the aftermath. Shaking, he returned home. The clock on his bedroom wall read 1:50 a.m. Nearly an hour had passed. He sat down with a cup of coffee, trying to process the impossible. That's when he noticed his wristwatch, a sturdy watch he had worn for 7 years without fail, had stopped. The time frozen on his wrist was 1:10 a.m. The strangest part was yet to come. He took off the watch and placed it on the table. Minutes later, the watch started working again on its own. Intrigued, he put it back on his wrist and the watch stopped instantly. For the next 3 days, this phenomenon persisted. The watch would only run when it was away from his body, as if the proximity to the object had turned Blackwell into a source of electromagnetic interference. At dawn, around 5 a.m., he returned to the tank. The morning light revealed evidence with frightening clarity. Next to the tank, in a field of yellow flowers, was a perfect dark brown ring, 28 feet in diameter. The grass inside the ring wasn't burned or broken. It was flattened, swirled in a counterclockwise pattern. In the exact center, a small 18-inch circle was completely devoid of flowers, as if they had been plucked with surgical precision. And just the day before, the owners had confirmed that the water tank was full. Now, 10,000 gallons of water were gone. There were no leaks, no cracks to empty the tank. With the existing wind-powered pumps, it would have taken 72 hours to empty that tank. The water was simply gone, but the deepest wounds were forming inside George Blackwell. In the 8 days following the encounter, he suffered from a series of debilitating symptoms, severe headaches that lasted from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., every day. Severe insomnia, waking up drenched in sweat, violent nausea, and vomiting every morning. These were not symptoms of panic or stress. They were the classic signs of radiation poisoning. That blast of hot air wasn't just wind, it was likely a byproduct of the object's propulsion system. And Blackwell had received a dangerous dose. When the farm owner arrived around 9 a.m., he found his caretaker as white as a ghost. Blackwell recounted the story and took him to the marks. The owner, knowing his employee's integrity, didn't doubt him. He contacted the local newspaper, and the Gippsland Times ran the story on the front page on October the 1st. The story exploded. UFO investigators, including Paul Norman of the Victorian UFO Research Society, an affiliate of MUFON, arrived on the scene. Even 3 months later in December, the mark on the ground was still visible. Soil samples were collected, but the results were inconclusive. However, the investigators determined that Blackwell's symptoms were consistent with radiation exposure. The case was deemed authentic, supported by the missing water, the physical marks, and the testimony of another person, a woman who reported being followed by strange lights on the same road on the same night, arriving in Rosedale around 1 a.m., the same time Blackwell's cattle began to panic. So this case stands out for me because it differs from other UFO accounts where there is an abduction or perhaps a message about caring for our environment. This was just indifferent extraterrestrials refueling their craft. They took what they wanted and left. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.